What is up, everybody? It is your man, Lukey. We are back with a podcast, and I am here with Fresno's own radio personality, Derek X. Derek, tell a little bit about your involvement in boxing and some of the great things you got going on right now.
I appreciate you having me on, Lukey. I'll be happy to do that. I got involved about a year and a half, 2 years ago with a local radio show here called The Fight Hour that was on 940 ESPN. And things moved on from there, and now I'm a show contributor for the Christopher Gabriel program on 940 ESPN. Christopher Gabriel is the anchor, and he does all the drive time, and usually I'm on at 7:35 in the morning. And I've been fortunate enough to, meet and work with people like you, Rick Merigian, and others that are involved with boxing here on the local scene that Rick Merigian has just brought back to life. And it's really been an interesting journey, and been able to do everything from watching the pro fights here to announcing an amateur event last month, a couple of months ago in October, with over 5,000 people in attendance. So it's been a fun ride so far.
Yeah, I mean, I just enjoy you as a person first and foremost, and secondly, I enjoy your professionalism and insight because you bring different types of conversations to the forefront. And lately, I've been feeling a little burnt out on just talking about fight after fight, week after week boxing topics, because it kind of all blends together after about 7 to 8 years. So I enjoy your insight of giving opinions that aren't just, let's go into this fight week. Okay, let's recap it. Let's go into the next fight week. I like that you bring a broader context to the sport of boxing.
And I appreciate that, Lukey, and that's part of what the X stands for in Derek X. Is the X kind of stands for the unknown. What I try and do is bring something to the table that may not be known by, your average boxing listening fan. And I think some of the thing that these are topics that we're going to get into, Lukey. Some of the reason you may get that burnout is because there's so much boxing, because there's so many different platforms. And I've seen you, Lukey. You cover everything from the main fights that are on that weekend to who's going to be an Olympic hopeful. So you're talking hundreds of people each year that you talk to, and it kind of gets repetitive because you're trying to find that new story when it deals with the issue and the topic of boxing. And sometimes it's not there. And when I was on the Fight Hour, when I very first started, we would do a 20-minute kind of investigational piece that got into more of the roots of boxing itself and some of the issues that were issues a long time ago, the fighters a long time ago, some of the topics about them that people may not know, and then how it correlates to modern day. I still do some of the prognosticating, but I usually hold that off until Friday on the Christopher Gabriel program. But I like finding the nuances of the sport, as opposed to Joe's fighting Bob this weekend, and here's the Vegas odds, and then, like you said, the next week, the next time you're on air, you're recapping that fight. So it gets a little bit redundant, but some of that I blame on how many different platforms we have in boxing.
Well, and also to be fair to you, and then I know a lot of the listeners are like, can you guys stop talking about the industry of journalism and just get into the boxing, all right? I understand that we will get there, but what I want to talk about too is the fact that when you do a 7 to 10 minute program on a radio thing, I've done it with you on the Fight Hour. It's not necessarily about what you bring to the table. It's about what is the person that likes football, basketball, and maybe wants to be informed about 2 boxing matches for the next month. What do they want out of this 5-minute segment? So when you go on there, you can't really always give the extensive knowledge breakdown. They want to hear Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, who's the best? Give it to me in 2. Okay, Terrence Crawford, he's fighting. Should I care? And that's kind of what you have to do when you take on these major media outlet jobs.
And you're exactly right. And then how do you, when you're talking about that, with me, it's how you get into the analysis of making that decision that is key. It's not just the decision of, okay, Wilder or Ortiz. I had picked that one to end by the 8th round by knockout, but I had reasons behind it. And that's why the Christopher Gabriel program helps me with that, because it's not just a 5-minute spot. So I get to kind of expound on it a little bit more as to why I came to that decision. So I understand what you're saying, and some of that has to do, Lukey, with the importance of boxing on a global scale when it comes to the world of sports. And here in America, some of it's waning. So they just want that quick blurb. Okay, Lukey, what's your thoughts? Okay, why'd you get there? Okay, cool. See you next week.
So this is our first topic I want to talk about, and it's just a simple question. But before I get into this simple question, I want to talk backwards. So my simple question that I'm putting out, thesis statement, is like, is boxing relevant right now, and how does it impact the culture here in America? But I wanted to first talk about, we both are on these Twitter, and I feel like on Twitter, there's a lot of kind of guys. Obviously, on the internet, you're going to get people that are mean-spirited, but I think boxing is this weird one where you're going to get maybe more mean-spirited people, not because they're bad people, but because being a boxing fan is so nuanced. Maybe to their friends, they're the boxing expert, and when they're on the internet with, say, 100 to 200 boxing experts, it's hard to play with others because their opinion has been the authority for so long.
Yeah, in their circle, it has been. And until you get acknowledgments from outside your circle, that's something you still got to work on. I've been tagged with that so-called title that you're talking about, and I do not like it because as far as I'm concerned, the more I learn, the more I need to know. So there are very few quote unquote boxing experts anymore. And I think social media in some aspects is to blame. If you look at the numbers, I believe as far as social media has been able to register, there are like 1,620 boxing influencers. And I think a lot of that comes from their own little boxing circles. And exactly like you said, hey, Bob over here's the best. He's always got the insights. He's always got that. Okay. How is his records in actually predicting the fights? How much knowledge is he bringing to these individuals that are listening to him? What qualifies him as an expert? And then these people get up online and, when somebody else makes a comment, they're like, oh, they'll throw out an F-bomb or you're an idiot. Instead of justifying like, okay, I see what you're saying there about Wilder, but here's why I disagree, and make it a conversation where everybody learns. Social media is too much of one-way statements. It really is not conversation anymore.
And then I have two thoughts with that. First off, we're so reasonable. Does that just mean we're old? Because this is like an old head. Like, is this like totally mean where our youth is gone that we're this reasonable? And secondly, with the advent of social media and like when we look at social, even me, right? When I go on Instagram, what am I drawn to? I'm drawn to something I can digest in 15 seconds. Something Correct. Where I get the beginning, the middle, and the end in maybe 10 seconds. I want it quick. So flashy mitts, loud heavy bag, that's probably going to resonate more with the average person that's not super knowledgeable over maybe say Andre Ward, who if you look at his career during social media, maybe didn't get the respect it should have because it can't be broken down in a minute. But then when he gets time to explain himself as an analyst, now and after his career, I think he's more famous than ever because you can look at his sound bites and put them on social media. What do you think the influence of the social mediaization of boxers is right now? And how do you think that influences the sport?
I think it influences it greatly. And I'm glad you brought up Andre Ward because his insights, because he's been there, done that. And so many people who interview boxers, especially current champions, are somewhat, a little bit scared to, hit those hard-hitting topics. Andre's not. With him being on the Contender, with him doing, the top-ranked fights, he throws out those opinions that at times are like, whoa, he actually said that. Well, you know what? He can say it because he's been there. And a lot of times, the man is not wrong. His insights into the sport and what it really takes to proceed as a champion are there. And with social media, if you look at this, it has a lot of influence on the sport. But again, a lot of it's not detailed. It's vague. You look at Devin Haney, how he used social media to take his career to the next level. I believe it was like a big percentage of his first 10 fights were in Mexico, and the guy's always getting booed and everything. And he's wondering, he's got his financial backers and everything. He's like, how do I take this next level? And then he develops the relationship with Black China, who has nothing to do with boxing. But she shows him how to use TMZ, use the topics and everything, to where he becomes a self-promoter. He self-promotes himself, and he starts getting on the bigger stage. Social media plays a huge aspect in this, because there was a fight a while back. I forget the gentleman's name. They actually broadcast it on Twitter, and they got some good feedback on that. The only problem is how do you get the big payday on the backside from that? So social media's influence on the growth of the sport is good, but it's only the growth of the sport for the average fan, who then has the average take on it, who then starts a bonfire because they can't intellectually debate their topics, and they'll just throw up, oh, you're an idiot, and that's a stupid statement. And honestly, Lukey, when I see stuff like that, I just delete it and move on. Responding to somebody like that is not worth your time, not worth your effort. That's why on a couple of your posts, you're like, oh, wow, okay, I guess everybody's an expert. I won't do this anymore. And I'm like, no, you won't. You'll keep doing what you do because you're you, Lukey. You have that following. So social media is always going to be a huge part of this. Where it goes from here is dependent upon the quality of the individual's reporting.
Yeah, and now I'm just going to keep piggybacking off of it. So let's go, because we're going to get to the relevancy, but I want to talk about, we've got an Olympic class coming up, right? I'm not going to get into the fighters because I feel like me and my boy Gray and the people that work for USA Boxing and the fighters in the tournament, that's the only people that really could talk shop on it. No shame or anything. The fighters just aren't out there enough for people to have debates, and it's not enjoyable for the average person.
Gotcha.
So how, moving forward, will one of these top fighters who doesn't have a social media presence be able to get himself in a good position if they don't have a strong social media out of this? And will we see fighters who maybe aren't as good as maybe a gold medalist or a silver medalist get more opportunities just based off the fact that they grow up in front of someone's eyes, and they're someone that they're like boxing guy in Instagram vlog world?
And you're exactly right with that perception that your question is actually its answer. The people that are the young men and women that are in the Olympics, they're focused on representing their country, not representing themselves. That's what the difference is. They're not self-promoting at this time. They're promoting the country that they work with. And if you want to get into the social media as to an individual who may not be quite as good, but get that presence, look at the Logan Paul fight from a couple of weeks ago. These guys, quote unquote, boxers, I'm sorry, I didn't even bother watching it. I know the undercard had more talent than they had, but social media looks at it as, oh, these are great people. It was the Kardashians in the ring as far as I was concerned. I really saw no good footwork. I didn't see any talent. Yet these guys got so much of a following that both of them were paid just on the purse $900,000 a piece. And what does an Olympian get when they first turn pro and get on a major undercard? I'll guarantee you, when Jose Ramirez fought his first fight, yes, he fought in Vegas and he was on the Pacquiao Marquez undercard, but he didn't get $900,000 for that. So yes, social media sometimes props these people up as to more than they are because they have such a huge following. And these followings, social media puts dollar figures on it. You look at Twitter, you look at Facebook, how do they have these values when there is no fiat behind them actually backing them up? Social media, it has to do with us as individuals. That's why they have that term in war, collateral damage. We're all collateral. So they look at people as money. The younger boxers, I think there needs to be a unified platform for the Olympics where they promote the boxers that are representing the country. That's where I think getting these individuals out, once you reach a certain level and you're getting ready to fight the higher tier fights, not just the entry level fights. The Olympics needs to be, the USA Boxing, they need to be putting these people out there more. They need to bring the recognition to them. That way, when they turn pro, there's a little bit more of a platform for them to stand on.
And now I'm going to go deeper into this question because that you gave me a new question.
Okay.
In the modern world with social media and young people, I feel like everything is so about oneself because like the platforms, it's like you can have a Twitter, an Instagram, you can put all your music on a thing where everyone can see what you watch. You can, everything's like, it used to be like in MySpace, you just look and you'd list your hobbies.
Correct.
Now you can literally just go and you can see everything someone does from their life to hobbies. You can literally watch minute by minute. And in a world like that that's so about one's own self, does a thing that's about a we or a common good, like the common country, is there less excitement around something like the Olympics when everything's about the individual? And are boxers not going to get the boost potentially because everyone's just looking so inward, not maybe thinking about a collective?
And I think you're right in that aspect because that's part of the splintering. I'm going to go down a little bit different road here. That's part of the splintering of boxing now is because of how money's made and how things are broadcast now. You're looking at so many of the professional boxers now that are into self-promotions, and they own their own promotional companies now. They are turning into from boxers to promoters. You look at some of the younger fighters today, i.e. Devin Haney, Jose Ramirez, yes, while they're fighting in a fight, they're getting paid as they're representing the company that's promoting them, but they're also promoting the undercard themselves. So there is a lot of individualism in there, and it's for that individual making the money. But I'm going to tell you this. If somebody at USA Boxing had the mindset of a Rick Meridian when it came to the promotional aspect of it, he could overcome that individualism and show these people why they need to pay attention to the youngsters coming up.
Well, I think that I wish Rick just kind of ran boxing because it was Rick's birthday yesterday, and he's like the hardest working guy. He builds up empires in boxing. And to me, I just don't understand why more people aren't just like, let's get Rick to do this card at this mega place like New York City that's not going to sell very well, but let's get Rick involved because he's hitting it out of the park pretty much everywhere he goes.
Everywhere he goes, and let's expound on that a little bit. How many times, here in Fresno, a couple of Jose's last fights, there are 12 to 15,000 people in the arena. He works with Gabe Flores Jr. up in Stockton. He puts over 10,000 in the arena. And people are thinking, okay, well, that's not a lot of people. Yes, in boxing it is. When you look at some of these title fights in New Orleans and in Texas and Nebraska, these are title fights. And you look in the stands, there's 3,000 to 4,000 people there. And then, yes, you're wondering, why hasn't somebody taken Meridian's blueprint or at least hired him to consult to do something like that? Because then it becomes more of a local event. Now, the offers have been there for Rick. He turns them down because he's a local guy. He wants to see everything grow locally. Now, that may in the future kind of bite him in the butt, or maybe in the future he does say, okay, his thing is he works so hard because he likes things done at a certain level that if he hires somebody, a lot of times they're not competent enough to get things done the way he wants to, so he just handles it him all. And that's not necessarily a good thing. He needs to expand. He has taken, like I said, Gabe Flores Jr. up in Stockton. He's taken him up to another level, but that's only here in California. How many people on the East Coast really know Gabe Flores Jr.? And if it wasn't for the last 6 months, how many people really know Jose Ramirez on a worldwide scale? Jose is not afraid to fight anybody anywhere, but he's not world renowned yet like a Crawford would be. So there are a lot of aspects where, yes, I agree. If Rick could consult and show these other people how to do it, if Top Rank or Matchroom just said, Rick, tell these guys in this area what to do, make them accountable, I think you would see a growth in boxing as far as quality fans who would really start following the sport, especially if they did it here in America. Boxing on a worldwide scale is growing. It's not here in the U.S.
So, let's go back to that thesis question. How relevant is boxing currently?
On what scale, Lukey? Because I have two
Just
different.
in America. In America, how relevant is boxing?
It's not as relevant as it used to be, and some of that, has to do with like HBO getting out of the boxing business, because they were real quality and truly big fights. And now you're looking at, a lot of people analyze pay-per-view as kind of the death of boxing here in America. And now because there are so many platforms, you got PBC with Fox and Fox Sports 1, you have Top Rank, dealing with ESPN, and DAZN streaming with partnerships with, Matchroom, which is actually one of their subsidiaries, and Golden Boy Promotions. There are so many different platforms that it makes it hard to really be relevant. You have some of the most relevant boxers here in America are Deontay Wilder and Floyd Mayweather. And that's about it. And it's because of the growth of boxing. You and I had this discussion after we did a topic on the Fight Hour. It's like, where have the great heavyweights gone? The great heavyweights haven't gone anywhere. The great American heavyweight is the one who's disappeared. Look at the stats on the heavyweights in the last 50 to 100 years, and how many Americans used to hold that belt title and how many Americans hold it now. And there's a big difference. It's not as relevant here in America as it used to be. And I honestly do not know if it will be until we get that face of boxing. Mayweather was the most high profile, but I don't know if he was really the face of boxing, like some of the old heavyweights of Ali and Frazier and Holmes that used to be there, because you can't just watch it as an average Joe. You have to pay to watch it. It's not on, Saturdays, ABC's Wild World of Sports anymore. You have to pay for it. In today's system, everybody's so busy, they use social media as instant gratification. It's kind of hard to sit there and watch a 12-round fight, through an app on your phone. And some of these platforms, the quality is not quite there. DAZN, their first couple of fights, great fights, horrible broadcasting, horrible audio. So I think the relevance in boxing here in America will take off as soon as we start getting some more of those great American heavyweights.
Yeah, because we could go two different directions. So I'm going to ask you, where would you rather go? Would you rather kind of enter into the Joshua Ruiz sphere, or do we want to enter into the way we watch fights and the distribution of fights currently and how confusing it is to keep up with watching fights? Which direction do you want to go?
Let's go into Joshua Ruiz a little bit, but let's back up a second here. Part of the relevance of boxing on a worldwide scale has exploded, but if you actually look to the reason why, some of it has to do with capitalism, Lukey. And the reason, I know we're getting kind of socioeconomic here, but a lot of it has to do, you look at these Eastern Bloc countries, a lot of the amateurs never turned pro. They would represent their country, they would get the gratification and all the recognizing for actually, doing something well for their country. That's why they have some of these top flight individuals, 300 to 400 wins. But now with the influx of capitalism in there, some of these boxers now are realizing they can keep their money as a pro. Whereas before, and justifiably, the government would come in and take just about everything that they would make. So why would they go pro? So now with the openings of this with like Triple G and Lomachenko and stuff like this, we're starting to see boxing on a worldwide scale growing because the individuals now, the boxers with the talent, are able to keep more of their money. Now we can forward that into Joshua Ruiz. Go ahead.
Okay, so going into Joshua Ruiz, for those unaware, it's going to happen at 1 o'clock on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. And this is going to be one of these fights where it's just going to be very, very confusing because it's going to be a good fight, but it's taking place strictly for money in Saudi Arabia in a newly developed arena that
Hmm.
I'm not even sure. We don't know if there's any issues in the arena because I'm assuming this is like the first event they've done there.
It is.
And
They
what my
actually built this 17,000 seat stadium for this event. Nothing else has ever been there. This will be the first event.
which that doesn't sound good to start with, just as a practitioner and someone that is in the leadership capacity. That just seems like that's destined to have a major technical issue go wrong because that's how first times always work out.
Yeah,
Um, but also, we've got this fight where, and I'm kind of going to the boring aspects, but not very transparent on drug testing commission, not very transparent on kind of the selection of the referee, the judges. A lot of kind of like questionable stuff, and a lot put on the U.S. boxing fan to be able to understand how to get to this app and watch this and to know what time it's coming on.
oh, exactly. And I agree with your point, 100% there, Lukey. But those are only aspects that you question because of your knowledge of the sport. I think the average Joe or average Joanne is just saying, whoa, we've got a title fight here. My boyfriend's buying it. I got to go watch the fight without any care of any of the background that you just brought up. To more than the average boxing fans, those are huge issues. And like you're saying,
Well,
you
let's
go
get
ahead
into
and
them.
well, and I even found this interesting. I found this last night that Joshua, given his Nigerian background and some of the travesties that have happened to Nigerians in Saudi Arabia recently, he was actually training in the British Embassy, not a gym that was made on site for both fighters to fight and work out at, the British Embassy. How did they set that up, and why did they do that there? Uh, there's so much, like you said, from the commission, the actual individuals that are be judging or refereeing this fight, and I believe the referee who is doing this fight also has only judged a few fights itself, because you and I know that there's a little bit of back and forth, that some of the referees have been judges and judges referees, so they learn how to see things from more than one side. The guy brought in is very controversial. And what it does is I think it plays into the style for Joshua. He allows, a lot of holding. He allows a lot of tie-ups. He likes to be in control instead of just helping dictate the pace for the fighters and let them do their thing. I don't know if that plays well for Ruiz. And there are so many different aspects of this that, like you said, make you question. Now it was agreed in the contract, if there was a second fight, that it would be at a quote unquote neutral site, and there would be quote unquote neutral referees and judges. I don't really know what the term neutral means. Is neutral maybe from where they're coming from, but I don't think they're very neutral in their biases.
Yeah, I mean, well, you got to also think about it since we're going political. Uh, if Joshua were to lose this would be one of the biggest. Like, DAZN would have a massive, I don't want to say failure of a year, but they'd really take a beating this year because
They
Golovkin
would take a
Canelo didn't happen,
they
and
would
then
take
Josh. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, Golovkin and Canelo didn't happen, which we all kind of feel they really wanted to have
Yes.
happen because kind of like DAZN employees who are also media members were really trumpeting, oh, that's gonna happen, which makes me feel that executives kind of said, hey, can you put that out there? And secondly, um, if Joshua loses a second time, he's really damaged in terms of being that commodity that people had built him up to be. And beyond that, Al Heyman is the advisor to Andy Ruiz. And then that belt, the heavyweight belt, is going to be long gone. Even if they strip a belt and Joshua fights and wins it, he's not going to have the majority of the belts anymore.
No, he's not. And you touched on a subject that I found really interesting. If Andy wins this fight, who's really in control of all four belts? PBC and Al Heyman. And that's going to really shift the power in the heavyweight division as to when, who, and where these heavyweight bouts can take place. I totally agree. I totally agree that if Joshua loses, this is a huge hit for DAZN, because the heavyweights are what really people really want to watch, unless you get an iconic fight, like you said, like Canelo or Triple G. Joshua loses, I don't see really where he goes from there, because who's really going to be willing to fight him anymore, because what's to gain? And if you look at what's to gain, that's the whole reason that Triple G Canelo 3 never happened. Somebody forgot to talk to Canelo about that when trying to prompt Triple G Canelo 3. Canelo has pretty much said, what do I have to prove? He has nothing to gain by taking a third fight, because whether you agree with the judges or not, and there's a lot of, discussion about that the first fight was a draw. Canelo felt he won. The second fight, Canelo did win. So what does he have to gain by taking a third fight? If he wins, he's like, I won the other two anyway. If he loses the belts. Well, two of his belts, I believe, are already gone because of, the sanctioning committees, just like you said, taking away one of the belts. And you and I discussed this before. You look at the IBF, they are famous for that. And if there's any other type of a rematch clause or certain aspects of the fight that are to already future fights that are to be determined in this contract, yes, even if Joshua wins, I believe he'll be down one or two belts shortly after.
Well, and I think the other problem too is one of the telling Fight Week comments was Anthony, he would like to what did he say? He'd like to have a trilogy with Andy Ruiz, which is kind of a weird statement to make going into, because I compare Anthony Joshua going into this fight to two other Olympic gold medalists. Is he Lennox Lewis, who lost to Asim Rahman, came right back, and beat Rahman? Or is he Audley Harrison, the Olympic gold medalist from the UK, who never lived up to his potential? And I feel like... Yeah,
I think that your insight on the second one is better, because look what Lennox Lewis actually did after the fight. He's one of our last undisputed heavyweight champions. I do not believe Joshua has the mindset to do that.
And thank you for using the word mindset, because this fight to me comes down to a simple word: temperament. And I feel Joshua lost the first fight because he's too aggressive. And in his mind, his temperament is, I'm going to stop people. I'm going to be explosive. I'm going to be a knockout guy. And he comes forward too much, and he leans in with his punches. He's got great technique, but he's very kind of average. And I mean that as a compliment. He's got average speed, average technical ability, little above average power, but nothing jumps out. But as a heavyweight, that's exceptional, because heavyweights typically have great variance in skill sets. But the big problem I noticed with Joshua is, he's used to being able to hurting guys and making technical mistakes. Power catches up. And Andy Ruiz was one of the first people I think he had fought in his life, or probably in the last years, that would drop it. He wouldn't just move his head, but he'd actually drop at the waist and lower the target. Where if he overcommits, he is greatly open and he's very off balance. And to me, that's a major tactical adjustment.
And you're absolutely right. The average boxing fan looks at it and says, well, Joshua's cut, he's bigger, he's better, he ought to just pound this guy. Nah, in boxing, and it's about angles, it's about footwork, it's about head work, it's about placing that punch, it's about being defensive. It's not just about size and, pounding somebody out. Andy learned to use, his size to get inside on Joshua. Now, I will throw a little bit out there. Joshua only had what I believe it was only a month or so to prepare for Andy because of the failed drug tests of Joshua's other opponent. So, sometimes that can catch you off guard in preparation. Look at what happened to the Vargas fight this past weekend. You know, it was a lot closer than it happened to be because of what, a 48
Oh,
hours
you
all of a
mean
sudden.
Valdez? Valdez,
Valdez.
not Vargas. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Valdez fight. And Valdez is tough. Oh man, I love that kid. Watching what he did against Quigg and how Quigg, you know, became a catchweight fight, and then how Quigg didn't even want to be reweighed before the match. There are rumors he weighed anywhere from 15 to 20 pounds more than him during the fight. He gets a broken jaw, broken teeth, but you know, fought through it. But anyway, getting back to my point of being unprepared for the opponent in front of you, I got to give some of that. I will throw Joshua's way. But when you're that skilled as an Olympian, have that many knockouts as a pro, have an unblemished record, you've got to have people in your camp that will get you prepared for it. I don't think they got him prepared for it. Because if you look at the odds, the Vegas odds, I believe that Joshua was a minus 3,500 favorite with Ruiz as a minus 1,500 to a minus 1,200 underdog. They gave Andy no chance. They didn't really look at Andy's record. His only blemish, a highly disputed split decision. So I believe that, you know, in this fight, if Joshua cannot close those holes that you talked about, there may be the same result. But I have a belief he may be prepared for it, you know, physically and in the ring. And again, it's the mindset. When you look into a person's eyes, I don't know if you saw the interview. I forget who did it. It was a round table with just a gentleman interviewing and Andy and Joshua sitting there. And Andy point blank said, "You quit." How does a guy not get fired up about that when somebody else says, "This is what you do for a living and everything, but you quit. You're just out of it." And you look, Joshua's temperament, his mindset wasn't like, "Okay, I won't quit next time," or, you know, "Yeah, you did catch me, but this time I'm pounding." Nothing. He just kind of sat there and looked at him like, "Oh, okay." So where's that toughness in the mindset? And if it goes into the later rounds, there is going to need to be that toughness. Now, Joshua has the ability to knock him out. He knocked Andy Ruiz down for the first time in his career. So the talent is there. Again, Lukey, mindset.
Yeah, I mean, my only thing I know about the segment you're saying is, and I kind of agree with my guy Julian J. Rock Williams, where I think Ruiz shouldn't have said that he quit. Because I think that
Exactly.
he's giving him a little bit. Because I think that the one thing I'd say about Joshua is not soft. He's a guy that's too tough for his own good. He reminds me in a weird way. It's a weird comparison, but he does remind me of him, of Amir Khan, who I'd never say is soft. It's just, I think in both cases, both guys' bodies fail them. Because I didn't see Joshua trying to quit in the fight. I saw him being very hurt and confused. Like, I didn't get the body language that said, "Oh, I don't want to be here." I get a guy that probably the room's spinning and he's unaware of what's going on, but if the ref says fight, he's going to fight. And that's what it looked like when the stoppage occurred.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't like ever giving a guy who potentially is more talented than you and has the better pedigree than you and has the money behind you, giving him bulletin board material. It just never seems like that works.
And it's funny you say that because the first thing I thought of when he said that is I cringed. Just like, if his fire wasn't lit, it is now.
Because part of the psychological warfare I saw in the first fight was what he was the "aw shucks, let me pose with your belts," kind of the unassuming guy. And I feel like that was kind of his thing. And leading into this fight, there's some sketchy videos out where Andy Ruiz has got these features of him going on like the Walmart with Dank City. Have you seen these? Dank City, a cannabis club or a weed dispensary or a weed something or another. It has
No,
these, they're very weird and like they don't make me feel good about picking Andy Ruiz if I was going to pick Andy Ruiz because it's just weird. It's cannabis club get access to Andy Ruiz, and then when they got access to him, they're just going to go shopping at Walmart. Like that's going to be all they're going to do. Like let's just go to Walmart and see that he's going to buy $100 of stuff. It just kind of makes you wonder what's the decision making going on.
But he's always been that way. And what some people seem to forget is Andy always bets on himself. Look at what happened with him at Top Rank. You know, he loses that split decision, and in a couple of fights afterwards, and I saw one of them was just strictly a tune-up where a guy, his opponent, just strictly paid Philly shell for about 3/4 of the fight. It was a tune-up. Andy said, okay, I want more money. Top Rank said, nah, not really seeing it. So Andy bought himself out for $700,000 and then went to PBC. And then all of a sudden, what happens? He gets the Joshua fight. He bets on himself again. Now all of a sudden he's making, I believe at that fight, $3 million. And for this next one, I think he's making over $9 million. Andy has bet on himself the last 2 years, and he has won. Now, has he gotten too comfortable with it? We'll see Saturday in the ring. But the man's always bet on himself, and he's always won, Lukey.
Okay, and then I guess we should probably touch on this too. We got Dillian White, who's, I guess, has some form of a PED suspension. We can't really comment on it because, like, basically they're like saying we're going to sue any journalist that said we got a PED violation, but then one journalist went out and said he for sure did. So at the very least, he has like a sketchy situation going on with him. We got Marcel Wach, who failed a drug test. Who else is on? Alexander Povetkin has failed a drug test. So we have multiple guys on this undercard that have failed a drug test. At the very least, that's sketchy. Like that, all these guys that have had drug test irregularities are just kind of getting put on a card where there's very little testing, it seems, from the outside looking in.
Let me ask you this. I'll pose the question to you on this, Lukey. Given the information that you just said and where the fight's at, do you think that's purposely done because the individuals and the entities putting on this fight want to see flat out brawls?
Well, I mean, I'll answer that in probably the most roundabout way that nobody ever wants to hear is it's like, I think the American public and sports public typically want that, want a higher performing athlete, but with the morality of what's it called? Of dealing with the consequence of, I want to see a product without a cheating athlete, right? So I think that's kind of where we're at in sports, is people want to go to a baseball game and see 15 home runs, but they don't want to feel bad that someone might be shortening their life by 15 years taking a crazy amount of drugs to do that. Or that someone might really hurt someone because they took drugs that made them super strong in a boxing match. I can't comment on it because I just don't feel comfortable speaking in this situation. But I do think that it creates a trend that I find unsettling, and it raises red flags.
And I absolutely agree with you. And you look at some of the shady stuff that has happened with Pacquiao and Mayweather too, as far as their quote unquote testings and where they're tested at and when they're tested and how the testing gets from one place to another. There are a lot of issues. What I'm getting at, Lukey, is this is what has been brought out is only what we know. Look at baseball. For years, it was, okay, all of these hitters are taking steroids. Then what happened about 8-10 years ago? Now all of a sudden they're finding out it was the pitchers doing it too. So I agree with you when people take stuff, and that's why I do not like catchweight fights, and I do not like when an individual comes in too much weight. No, the advantage is everything's supposed to be equal. Then it's your talent and skill once you get inside the ring. And when you're taking in enhancement, that doesn't balance the tables out. And I agree with you. Until we get a more unified platform, like getting high rehydration clauses in all fights. I believe it's the IBF that doesn't have them. I'm not positive. But until you get one unified platform that says, look, here are all the rules, here's all of these things that everybody needs to abide by, this is going to happen. And the American public or the worldwide public, like you said, unfortunately, in a lot of instances, doesn't care about the repercussions. They care about, okay, how much of a brawl or a fight are we going to have in here? Are we going to knock somebody out, or somebody going to get put in the hospital? They think, okay, that's an event that we just watched. And then they forget about the fighter as he's in the hospital 2 weeks later, still recovering from TBI.
And I guess to kind of close up this topic is, to steal a phrase from Andre Ward, is I don't want to label anyone a PED current user, even if their past has shown them that, because that's a heavy coat to throw on someone. That's no different than if I were to say someone's a racist, a sexist. These are heavy labels to throw around freely. So if I throw that label around, I want the words I throw around to have meaning, where someone says that guy wouldn't just say that to say that. So I don't want to make an assumption, because for all I know, these guys could all have PED violations, but they could be all from Eastern Europe, and it could just be convenient, and their fans could actually get visas. So I don't feel comfortable. I'm just saying it's an alarming trend that I've picked up on, but I don't feel comfortable, and I wanted to note that to the listeners so they can make their own judgments.
And I totally agree with you. And I think some of the onus of this is just like in baseball. Once you get to a certain level, they're making so much money. Some of these individuals don't care if they get caught. No, you don't want to label them, as a commentator, somebody who looks into the sport. And I agree with that. I think the only labels that should come out are by the commissions that define the wrongdoings, and then they substantiate it with, look, this individual had this amount of clenbuterol in their system, and that's more than, is allowable by this commission. So I agree with you, because I believe that there was also a fighter from Asia. He got nailed for the clenbuterol right about the time that Canelo did, but their commission at that time said, look, it's the way of life over here. That's what's in the meats. It's okay. He can fight. And then Canelo gets crucified for it. Now, Canelo, should have been in here in America, and he should have done things differently. But you're right. You don't want to label those people, but that's social media, one-way conversations. Look, he did this. I'm right. Man, sometimes
that's what I'm trying to model in my platform, which I feel is for the hardcore boxing enthusiast, is reasonable. So we're really trying to think things out. We're trying to, if someone honks at, we're trying to be the boxing equivalent of someone honks at you in your car, you just let them go by you. You don't start yipping and yapping with them, and then all of a sudden you've got yourself a confrontation. This is the boxing equivalent of, we're going to be mature adults that our mom and dad would be proud of us if they saw how we behaved. If we had kids, they'd go, okay, that's how dad acts. I could act like him. I get ashamed for some of these boxers and some of these media members and just some of these people on boxing social media, because I don't know how their parents and children could look at them and be proud of the actions in which they behave.
And you're right. And some of the social media stuff is to say something outrageous, just so you get attentions, just so you get likes, just so you get followers, just so you can become an influencer, just so you can get paid. It really doesn't have a lot to do with your actual intellect and the quality of the story. That's why I appreciate your platforms, and I appreciate your tweets. You get people to think in different ways. Some of the responses are people don't want to think that way, but that's not what you're trying to do. You're trying to get them to educate themselves on the sport, and your platforms are great, Lukey.
And before I head you out of here, I wanted to touch on one quick subject, but I know we're limited for time, so it's going to just be a quick out. I wanted to go quickly over my 2010 to 2020 list of the most influential boxers. I'm going to read off the list that I'm working on for an article, and I want to get your take, and maybe you move people around. Keep in mind there's no order, although in my opinion this is the order. I
Okay.
think Floyd Mayweather is the most influential. I think the second is Canelo Alvarez. The third is Andre Ward. The fourth, Manny Pacquiao. The fifth, Deontay Wilder. The sixth, Gennady Golovkin. Seventh, Vasyl Lomachenko. Eighth, Earl Spence Jr. Ninth, Terrence Crawford. And at number 10, a controversial pick, probably Adrian Broner. So
Whoa.
that is who I think are the 10 most influential boxers. We're not talking about the best fighters. We're talking about the people that influence the sport of boxing the most, and we will see their influence upon young fighters in the next decade.
And,
What do you
and
think?
that is, a great list. And I've noticed you changed that from a couple of days ago, and you and I had actually, thrown the name Andre Ward out there. And that is a great list because they're influential in different ways. And I'm going to go backwards on this. I agree with your last pick of from before. He was down at the bottom of the list of Ryan Garcia. And we're using the topic here of influential boxers, not the top 10, not the pound for pound, not the most money making. It is how do they influence the sport? We spent most of this topic talking about social media. Ryan Garcia is learning how to use social media. He got himself a renegotiated contract. He's influencing the sport. He's starting to get more quality opponents. Moving up from that list, number 8, I got Andre Ward for the same reasons that you had and what we discussed about earlier. He is great commentating, and he has the moxie to back it up because he's been there. 7, Terrence Crawford, because of what he does for the sport and how he will fight anybody. He needs to get a little bit more out there publicly, but he's influenced in the aspect of here I am, I'll take all fighters. It's going to be, a show when you see him. 6, Devin Haney, because how he influenced the sport from a social media aspect to promote himself. He gave the groundwork for people like Ryan Garcia. Number 5, I got a 3-way tie here, and it's because they all need each other. It's Wilder, Joshua, and Tyson Fury. Wilder, because of how he has brought, the heavyweight position to some prominence here in America. Joshua in the UK, he made 55 million last year, probably 75 million this year. And Tyson Fury, since he came to America, he's become very influential in the aspects of people like what he's doing. They like to see what he's doing, and he has great insight into the fights. Number 4, Manny Pacquiao. Why? Because of his influence in the Philippines and Asia, huge following. The same thing for number 3, Canelo. You look at him and how he brings the Mexican fans, he gets them in a tizzy. These last two, they take sections of the world and influence it. Floyd Mayweather, him because he's the most high profile, and he's usually always about the money though. So some of it's him, some of it's the sport. And my number 1 is going to kind of throw you off here a little bit because I believe he's iconic, and that's Muhammad Ali. You look at everybody in the last few years, they always want to emulate Ali. You look at boxing memes and statements made on social media, they all go back to Ali. Everybody wants to be Ali because of what he did to the social injustice of the 60s and how he had to stop fighting for a while. If he was a modern day boxer, he would dwarf all of these individuals because he knows how to work people. He still has one of the biggest influences in the sport of boxing of all time, Lukey.
And you know what's crazy about you bringing that up is he actually passed away in this decade, and his passing was bigger than a lot of boxers' current time in the sport.
And you were 100. Yep.
So, before I let you out of here, let's get you talking about where people can listen to you on and follow you on your platforms. If people enjoy this, maybe we'll bring you back, I don't know, once a month, once every 2 months, because you're extremely busy. So we'll see what the schedule looks like, but we also want people to let me know if they enjoy the conversation, and we'll just continue it. So let people know where they can follow you.
Absolutely, Lukey. And I really appreciate you having me on this platform. I've always respected everything that you've done on the sport. If people want to follow me, I'm on Instagram at DerekX_559. On Twitter, I'm at DX Behind the Mic. Also, every other Friday at 7:30 a.m., I'm on 940 ESPN Radio as the show contributor for boxing on the Christopher Gabriel program. I'm usually on there for a half hour, 45 minutes. I am his boxing commentator. You can follow that if you, any Alexa device, if you put in 940 AM radio, KFIG, Fresno, California, you can listen to it, or you can go to the 940 ESPN site. Every show is podcasted, and you can listen to the insights from there. I hope we get some great follow-up on this, Lukey. I'd love to be a contributor. Yeah, and let's look at the time frames. Maybe once a month I ought to do something like that. But I really appreciate your in-depth conversation.
And we also, before you go, because I know we're going slightly over, is what's the whole gag you got with the Christopher Gabriel show where there's the burrito stuff? I see you guys doing that on Twitter. Talk about the burrito thing, because I'm in the dark here, and I get there's something going on, and I'm sure there's people that follow me that maybe follow you, and they're going, what's going on with this burrito thing?
Basically what it was is Christopher Gabriel has a guy with the Big Ten. He commentates. He has worked with him for years. They do football picks every Friday. And Christopher Gabriel for years has been promising him a breakfast burrito. And it became a quote unquote point of contention between him and Tony Landry about it. And there was always some kind of remarks made about it. So when I started getting on the 7:30 a.m. broadcast, we had a couple of our shows done from the meat market, and they gave away breakfast burritos. So me being the kind person I am, I had to kind of just throw it out there and take a picture of, hey, Tony Landy, I got my breakfast burrito. Where's yours? And then I started taking odds on whether I'd get my second one before he even got one. And then Christopher Gabriel actually had he has a individual comes on Fridays, I forget his name, who reviews movies and everything. And he actually did a whole synopsis of the breakfast burrito, compared it to the Watergate saga in DC. And he gave a complete rundown of all of the players and contentions going on in this. It was just kind of a gag, just kind of Christopher Gabriel does that a lot with his individuals. He likes looking at the lighter side of things. So the breakfast burrito thing is my way of interjecting myself into that conversation.
Well, right on. And Devin Haney, I put on Twitter, my man Derek X said real Devin Haney is the number 6 most influential boxer of this decade on the podcast today. Thoughts? And Devin Haney retweeted with a fact: from turning pro in Mexico at age 16, becoming the youngest to ever fight at MGM, to becoming the youngest world champion in boxing today, very influential, and let's not forget the youngest promoter ever. So Derek X making the headlines with young Devin Haney within a minute of the being up. Okay,
yes, sir.
Well,
we will do that. Okay. I will be in contact with you soon. Thank you so much, Lukey.
Right on, my man. So I'll talk to you soon.